There's, these people that set up these trusts, one of the things they tell you is there's a way, like if you have a swimming pool in your backyard, you can set it up so that a separate trust owns the swimming pool.
Yeah.
Right? And so, and then you lease the swimming pool from the trust. And so then, anybody that, any of the neighbor kids that go swimming in the swimming pool, they sign a disclaimer and all that stuff. But so if somebody sues you, for example, and they don't sue you, they sue the swimming pool, right? And if they win, well, then they get the swimming pool, right?
Yeah.
But there's a contract in the lease agreement, and it says that you got 30 days to get the swimming pool off the property.
Yeah.
So you better get the swimming pool off the property. You got 30 days, or I'm going to seize it.
Yeah, every single asset should be in a separate holding trust.
Exactly, exactly. Especially things that expose you to a lot of liability. But so these are all things to consider. Trust is nothing more than something being held in trust for some beneficiaries. There are many different types of trusts: constructive trusts, STK trust, contract trust, living trusts. There are two basic categories: revocable and irrevocable. A quitclaim deed is a deed of conveyance by way of release. And then it talks about color and color of law, usufruct, equity. We already talked about all of this stuff. Beneficial interest. Is that right which a person has in a contract made with another? Is if A makes a contract with B, that he will pay C a certain sum of money, B has a legal interest in the contract, and C the beneficial interest. And a beneficiary is the term frequently used, synonymous with the technical phrase STK trust. And then it talks about who beneficiaries are persons, settlers are persons, founders are persons, grantors person, beneficiaries a person, settlers and founders, and this is all Black's eighth. Pure trust organization consists of a U.S. constitutional right to contract which cannot be abridged. The agreement, when executed, becomes a federal organization and not under the laws passed by the several legislatures. A pure trust is not subject to legislative control. The United States Supreme Court holds that the trust relationship comes under the realm of equity based upon the common law and is not subject to legislative restrictions as are corporations and other organizations created by legislative authority. So it's not subject to anything by any legislature. You make up your own rules.
They can't even look at the trust.
They don't even have authority to subpoena the trust documents.
Nope.
And when you're going through customs and you're carrying a trust document that is got the trust label on it and everything, you're not allowed to open it.
It's proprietary, absolutely. The basis for common law trust in this connection is not that such organizations are creatures of common law as distinguished from equity, but they are created under the common law of contracts and do not depend upon any statute. It is free from control by certificate holders than it is a pure trust. And so that's what we're talking about with certificate holders, okay? These ones don't have beneficiaries, they're certificate holders. But the way that in the trust it says that the certificate holders do not have any say in what goes on in the trust.
So you should have had labels for all the things that you were carrying through customs that were in a trust.
Well, the only thing really was the travel trailer and the truck was in trusts. And
then they shouldn't have been able to look at them.
well,
Yeah, I've, from what I know, each individual, like your laptop, your pen, everything can have
A sticker.
Well, you can,
sticker
yeah, that's true.
registering each item to the trust.
I've done that,
And
But,
and also, when you're carrying a trust across the border, like a document, they treat you special. Remember, or
Yeah.
we know a guy that went through the border with the trust, and they said they talked. They gave him. I don't even think he had to go through
You didn't even go through the
checkout.
rigmaroles, yeah.
Yeah, they gave him special treatment.
is that right?
Yeah. Like a diplomat, they treat you like a diplomat.
Yeah, because it's a truly private entity,
Yep.
and they have no jurisdiction over it at all.
Yeah, really interesting.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Well, that's something. to
And
think
the
about.
courts completely support them because they're so scared of them. Yeah.
Well, that's very interesting,
That
because
book I
my
was telling
truck
you
and my
about.
travel trailer are both owned by trusts. So then technically, they shouldn't have
They
been
should-
able to look inside it.
That's
You know
right.
what?
No, but it's up to the trustee to be strong enough to hold it, like, to protect the trust.
Mm-hmm.
The trust is only as strong as the trustees.
Because you're actually breaking your oath.
Yeah.
as
Well,
a
I'm
tru-
not
as
the
a
trustee, I'm just the manager.
Oh, well, I don't know about that, but a trustee, they're not allowed to have him break his oath, because he swore an oath to secrecy.
Right,
You
Yeah.
know, did you have a little sign on your trailer? No admittance, this is trust.
Trust property?
Or whatever, something.
No, I didn't, no.
If you had something like that, you know, a fine of $500,000 or whatever.
Actually, I could put that stuff on there because they probably didn't see it.
They didn't
It was
see it.
there anyways.
That's right.
I told them though, when I was in there, that it's owned by a trust. I told them that.
Well, then they should have backed off.
That's
That's
something to
interesting.
think about next time, that's a good idea.
Something to check.
A pure trust is a contractual relationship in trust form. Fair market value is determined by property received by the taxpayer, not the fair market value of the property transferred by the taxpayer. Certificates are personal property and convey no interest in the trust property. Certificates in exchange are not taxable until a realized gain has occurred. So in other words, this is the power of a trust, if you think about it. Because a trust is like an open transaction, okay? If you think about it, that's exactly what a trust is, okay? Because you give this property to this trust for 20 years, and until it comes out of the trust, we don't know what it's worth. You see what I'm saying? Because we have no idea what it's going to be worth 20 years from now. And we can't possibly say, until it comes out of the trust, and that's what this is saying, or this previous case, right? In exchange are not taxable until a realized gain is accrued, okay? In other words, it's got to come out of the trust, and it's got to go back to the same guy it came from. See what I'm saying? Then they can calculate the gain, and then there's a taxable event. Until then, it's impossible to calculate. And so that's why trusts are so powerful, because it's an open transaction, and nothing happens, there's no way of determining a value until the trust is liquidated. And think about it, William Penn set up a trust. If the trust is set up properly, you never make it perpetual, okay? You cannot make it perpetual because there's laws against perpetuities. Excuse me. But so you just make it so that the board of trustees can decide if they want to extend it or shorten it or terminate it. You see what I'm saying? And so the trust can just renew itself periodically, and that's it. And
Yeah.
that's why this trust from William Penn is still operating,
What-
400 years later.
Wow.
What about Howard Hughes? Is that in trust?
All the dynastic
I'm sure it
families
was.
operate the same way.
Sure
Did
it
he
was.
haven't probated his will?
Sure it was. Even bad bargains and generous business transactions do not result in taxable gifts. Certificates are without determinable fair market value. No gain or loss is recognized until the cost or other basis of the property disposed of has been recovered. And that's from the Master Tax Guide. Exchange is the giving of one thing for another thing in kind, excluding money as a basis of measure. So that's why you exchange the house for a certificate.
Yeah, trust.
Okay. That's exactly what you do. The house or the car or the motorboat, you just get a certificate. Certificates are not chattels, but are evidences of intangible rights. So I have this piece of paper, but it's not chattel. So you cannot put a lien on it. You cannot do anything to it. It's just a piece of paper. You see what I'm saying? The trustees of a trust have all the power necessary to carry out their obligations which they assume, and their books and records are not subject to review or subpoena. They don't have authority to even subpoena the records. The trustees of a trust shall have all the power necessary. Well, it's the same thing, only a different court case. These trusts are done by a creator, okay? Creates the trust and offers the trust certificates. The exchanger exchanges $25 in silver, which is silver eagles in this case, or it could be, $75 or, 75 Canadian in silver maple leafs for the trust certificates, okay? The creator appoints the trustee, so when the creator creates the trust and offers the trust certificates, And so then this exchanger says, well, I'll buy one of those trust certificates and I'll give you the silver for it. So that's what creates the trust, okay? You have this trust that has the silver, and this guy has this, the certificate. And so then the creator, what he says is that, well, he says, I'm gonna appoint you to be trustee. So now you have a trustee. So now the trust is in place. And so then what happens is the guy that has the certificate says, well, you know, I'd like my silver back. And so then he gives the silver back to the trustee, and he gives the, I should say, he gives the certificate back to the trustee, gets his silver back, and now the trust is established. And so then what they do is the EIN is done with the limited liability company. So the trust never gets an employer number. It never shows up in the matrix. It's kind of like a silent partner behind the scenes, okay? Trust procures a limited liability company. The limited liability company gets the EIN and opens the bank account. And that's what American Engineering Services is. So what happens is the limited liability company is set up as a partnership. So you have two LLCs, actually the trust and the LLC that set up another LLC. And that's the American Engineering Services, the one that I operate, manage. And it's owned by 97% by the trust and 3% by another LLC. And the other LLC set it up, and they got the EIN number for it and stuff. So now it files a tax return, but it's a reporting tax return only. And 97% of the profit or loss goes to what the IRS considers to be a disregarded entity. They don't even care. It says right in their paperwork it's a disregarded entity. 1065 tax returns, reporting only, that's the end of it. Yeah, so anyways, that's really the whole thing. I'd have to show you mine that I have, but I probably showed you more than I should.
Yeah.
You can also appoint a protector. So
Yes.
his job is to make sure that that trustee follows the original intent of the trust. So if that trustee doesn't do his job, he's out of there.
Well, that's right. Well, if they don't like the trustee, you know, yeah, they can appoint a new one. That's right. To fire the
Pretty
trustee. The
fascinating.
protector's
It's
job is to fire the
fascinating.
trustee.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so this is going to be asserting sovereignty. Let me look here. $122 slides.
Ooh.
Oh, we're going to be done here in decent time from the
Well,
beginning.
early today, is that what you heard?
I wouldn't say early, but certainly not late. This one and de jure government are the last two,
Excellent.
and that'll be it. So, what you're going to learn today is who you are, how to assert your rights, a procedure to build a case against our public servants that'll stand up in court, and they'll know exactly what you're doing, but that's what you want. Because most of them, in my opinion, are just honest, hardworking people that, you know, maybe they haven't been told. And once they're told, you know, they'll probably do what they have to do, you know. Now, there are criminals, and as if it also lays the foundation so that you can build a case against any criminals. I've dealt with law and regulation all my life. I've worked for over 35 years in aviation, starting in 1976, believe it or not. In the late 80s, someone told me about the two classes citizens, and in the early, in the early 90s. And I told them that they were crazy. I said, "You're nuts. You don't know what you're talking about." And then they produced some court cases that talked about it, and I had to look into it. And I've basically been looking into it ever since. In the mid-1990s, I was in Toronto working for Bombardier on a contract, and I met Patrick Ellis. And Patrick Ellis taught me about court procedure and how to file a lawsuit. It was just about that time when Customs stole my truck, so it was Customs that I filed my first lawsuit. I filed several lawsuits in Ontario and been to Ontario Court of Appeals twice. I filed numerous lawsuits in the U.S. I've taken them to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit, the Fifth Circuit, the Second Circuit, and the D.C. Circuit. I have taken 3 cases to the U.S. Supreme Court. In 2004, I was recommended to me to get some of Rice McLeod's material. Rice McLeod was Attorney General for the Republic of Texas. Rice McLeod had a very down-to-earth way of explaining the law, and he really helped me see what was going on. In 2006, I moved to Texas and got involved with the Republic of Texas. I was elected to Congress for the Republic of Texas. The Congress for the Republic of Texas elected me to be Speaker, and I was Speaker for the House of Representatives for the Republic of Texas for 1.5 years before I had to leave for a contract in New York because I got laid off. Over the years, I've learned that we're under martial law. All courts are corporate commercial courts in business to make a profit. All courts are banks and leverage the filing fees. That's true. All judges and prosecutors are getting royalties from every case they hear. There's no real justice. They will slap whoever violated your rights, but it will be behind the scenes, and the best way to deal with our public servants is administratively. Over the years, I've learned that there are few de jure governments operating on the planet, except for the Republic of Texas and Ukraine, maybe Russia. Almost all laws are color of law. Almost all countries are under martial law. They set up everybody for slavery. Do you want to be a slave? Is there a price for your freedom that you're not prepared to pay? And this is one thing that you have to sit down and think about. You know, how far are you prepared to push it? The burden is on you to assert your rights. I cannot assert your rights for you. It's impossible. If you do not assert your rights, you lose them. How many times do they tell you that? They tell you that all over the place. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. How many times do they tell you that? The burden is on the defendant to show the non-existence of jurisdictional facts. This is a Texas court case. Because we're under martial law, the courts presume everything. If you go on the attack, you can defeat their presumptions. If this procedure is followed properly, the system will deal with any criminals that are exposed. They'll deal with it. Because we're under martial law, if you're already under attack, it becomes very difficult. Again, remember that Supreme Court case that says that if you complete something and you don't do it at the proper time, jurisdiction, then you lose that opportunity forever in that case. It is much easier if you attack them before they ever see you. And that's essentially what you have to do. I mean, 99% of what they're doing is because you gave them a reason to do it. You gave them reason to presume you're a slave. So you have to take away that reason. Most of the stuff is our own fault. They've been good teachers for me because I do to them what they do to me. I grind them through my system. I presume they're guilty and make them prove they're not. I started out by filing commercial liens in 2005. I filed a $15 million commercial lien against the IRS and all commissioners and deputy commissioners. IRS Commissioner Mark Everson resigned. George Bush had him on the White House lawn saying it's the toughest job in the country. I filed a $500 million commercial lien against JP Morgan Chase Bank and all of their executive officers. I filed a $500 million commercial lien against Wilshire Credit Corporation, all of their executive officers. I filed a $3 billion commercial lien against a law firm in Phoenix, and all of their executive officers that were stealing my house. I filed a $15 million commercial lien against Capital One Bank and all of their executive officers. I sent numerous invoices. The United States owes me approximately $2 billion. The reason I'm telling you all this is that I believe that commercial liens work and are valid, but if you are operating in their system, they are thieves. There's no honor among thieves. When you go into their commercial system, you give up your common law rights. I started filing criminal complaints and I saw much better results. I filed hundreds of notice of demands and dozens of criminal complaints. Almost all of the criminal complaints may be viewed at Pinal County Recorder's website. I've got hundreds of documents I've filed there, I'll tell you. I spent thousands. After filing criminal complaints, I've seen numerous people resign or removed. 3 U.S. attorneys in Arizona, 3 U.S. attorneys in Texas, U.S. Attorney General Alberta Gonzalez. I filed a petition for a writ of certiorari and attached a criminal complaint against Alberta Gonzalez, and 2 weeks later he resigns and says that he's hiring attorneys to defend himself from the Department of Justice. Serious. Of course, they're not gonna come out and say, oh yeah, it's because of what you filed. Because, think about it, I'm accusing them of treason, sedition, perjury of oath, I mean, multiple felonies. So they're never ever, but it's amazing how many times when I do this stuff, all of a sudden, the guy disappears. It's amazing. U.S. Attorney Gonzalez, U.S. Solicitor General Paul Clements, Pennsylvania Attorney General, Ohio Public Safety Commissioner, IRS Commissioner, 2 Alberta Attorney Generals, U.S. Congressmen, U.S. Senators. I've seen positive results in Ontario after filing a lawsuit within 2 weeks. There was an announcement on national TV. The issue I brought up in my lawsuit was not to happen, would not be tolerated, and that was over compelled social insurance numbers. And they actually talked about it on national TV. And even now, there's a guy in Ontario that told me that he had called up CRA and said to them, my son doesn't think he has to get a social insurance number. Can you tell him he has to get a social insurance number? And they said, sure, but let us do some research and we'll call you back. And they called him back a day later, and they said, you know what, he doesn't have to get one. And then they said to him, and then he said to him, he says, well, can you tell his employer he doesn't have to get one? And they said, sure. So then they told his employer he doesn't have to get a social insurance number.
Did he put that in writing and sign it?
I'm sure they did. I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that, but they told his employer, and he never did have to get a social insurance number, and by definition, he's a non-taxpayer too. Think about it. This happened twice over 2 lawsuits. U.S. attorneys were removed. They'll never admit that it had anything to do with what I did. You know, you're accusing them of multiple felonies. Oh, and I already told you about this. I filed criminal complaints against the court clerk for addressing mail to me with a zip code, and the clerk disappears and all future mail doesn't have a zip code. This is a procedure I developed over the last 7 years. I send a registered letter to my public servant. When my public servant violates my rights, I file a criminal complaint against him and send it to his boss. After 30 days, I make up another criminal complaint naming my public servant and his boss as a co-conspirator and accomplice after the fact, and send it to the next guy up the chain of command with a notice and demand saying, you know, I demand that you take care of these criminals. After 30 days, I make up another criminal complaint naming my public servant and his boss as a co-conspirator and accomplice after the fact, and their boss's boss as a co-conspirator and accomplice after the fact. And I send it to the next guy up the chain of command. I keep going up the chain of command right up to the President or the Queen, and I always make sure they get a copy. You see this over here? This is a criminal complaint against the Queen. I'm going to be sending her a copy here pretty soon, because this stuff with customs is proof that she's perjured her oath. I always record the criminal complaints because after 30 days it becomes public policy, which is like a regulation. Technically, they're all supposed to record anything, but many times they give you a hard time depending on who is running it and whether they have a problem perjuring their oath. Some counties will literally record anything. Pinal County, Arizona told me that they record a hamburger if I paid money. When I send them a notice of demand, usually I get no response at all. And that's good. That means there's acquiesced, and there's something that you're saying. If there's something that you're saying that's not true, then they have a duty to point it out. That's called fraud. They don't.
You should record a McDonald's hamburger to see how long it lasts.
Yeah, no joke.
Forever.
Silence can only be equated with fraud when there's a legal and moral duty to speak, or when inquiry left unanswered would be intentionally misleading. So they have a duty to respond. An intentional perversion of truth for the purpose of inducing another into reliance on some part or valuable thing belonging to him to surrender a legal right. So anyways, they have a duty to respond, and I tell them that. I put it in my documents that they're estoppel certificates is what they are. Puts them into estoppel, and either you're stopped or you're going to send me a reason why I'm wrong. They never or rarely respond. When one can, fraud is when one conveys a false impression or disclosure by some facts with concealment of others. Such concealment is in effect a false representation. What is disclosed is the whole truth. And a suppression of material fact is also fraud. Fraud and deceit may arise from silence where there is a duty to speak the truth, as well as from speaking an untruth. Where a relation of trust or confidence exists between two parties so that one places peculiar reliance and trustworthiness of another, the latter is under duty to make a true and faithful disclosure of all material facts. Concealing a material fact and there's duty to disclose may be actionable fraud. Fraud can be committed by failure to speak when the duty of speaking is imposed. One of the first documents I sent out was a Pinal County recorder. She sent a very short letter back, said, thank you for your document. I put it on file for future reference, and she signed it personally. And it said, most respectfully. I mean, that's a good answer. A judge in Texas sent me a certified copy of his oath of office and surety bond. That's a pretty good answer, too. Edmonton City Police sent a letter acknowledging receipt of the document. And this is actually a good answer. It's right here. And it basically says, I've reviewed the contents and note there are no articulated complaints of misconduct or service with respect to any member of the Edmonton Police Service. As such, this matter is classified as information only, is now concluded. Right, perfect, it's information only.
Oh, was that one of them?
Yeah, could you look back, like, what did you send that got this?
A notice and demand. I sent one of my notice and demands.
So, like, could you give us a little more information on the situation, the scenario?
It was just a standard notice and demand that I send out to chiefs of police, county sheriffs, chief judges, chief prosecutors in every city and town that I travel with.
So you just send them a letter saying, I'm in town.
The one that I sent to them was probably about 8 pages. And I don't know if I've got it digital in here. I can show it to you if you want.
Well, I'm just more trying to understand
But
the
what
overall
it
strategy.
basically says is that I'm going to be traveling in your area, and I don't have a driver's license, and you don't have any more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-car.
And then you give case law and stuff that's set, like 8 pages worth of stuff. And then the whole idea is you get pulled over in Edmonton, for example, and you can say...
Never had a problem with the Edmonton police.
But let's say you're speeding, you get pulled over. They
Huh?
would. The idea is that they would have been knowledgeable about. Oh, you're just Glenn. No problem. Have a nice day.
It might be that way. You never know.
Or let's say you have some kind of a more negative experience on the roadside. You can then contact the chief of police and say, hey, 2 weeks ago I sent you this letter, and then yesterday
Actually-
your constable Bob was harassing me. Like, I'm just
Actually, what happened, I haven't had any problem in Edmonton. I did get stopped in Calgary, and we'll talk about that. I did wind up getting us doing a lawsuit in Lethbridge. That's the reason that Customs is involved, because I named them in the lawsuit too. And they didn't like it. Wah, wah, wah. But so there's various ways that you can approach it. But my attitude is that if they do anything, then it's perjury of oath, and I sue them. And that's part of the educational process, part of training them. Never had a problem with the Lethbridge police after that, though, I can tell you that. Never had any problems at all with Lethbridge. Anyways, we'll talk more about what the procedure is, okay? But basically, I serve them with a letter, and it's the one that they got was about 8 pages. Now the ones I send out are probably about 40 pages. But the ones they got back then was probably about 8 pages. And it had some court citations in it and a few things, and it basically said that you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-car. And I'm going to be traveling in your area, and I don't have a driver's license.
And I don't expect to be harassed or have any
Well,
problems. with your agents.
it'll say stuff like, I demand that you protect my rights. You know,
Because you work for me.
essentially.
In that
Of course, I
capacity.
accept your oath of office. That's one of the things it says. We go through that. We'll go through all of that. U.S. Solicitor General sent me a letter acknowledging my notice and demands. And this is interesting. Notice how they spell my name. And I think I talked about that before. My given names are Glenn Winningham. My family name is Fern. And at common law, the family name is never mentioned. Only the given names are mentioned. That's the reason Queen Elizabeth. Most people don't know that her last name, her family name, is Windsor. And actually her married name is Mountbatten, because Prince Philip is Philip Mountbatten. but again, the family name's never mentioned at common law, and they all know it. So I tell them that you're gonna send the mail exactly like I tell you, or you intend to engage in mail fraud. And they do, look at that. And again, because they know that the family name is never mentioned, it's Dear Mr. Winningham, my given names. And basically they say, thank you for your correspondence. The task of the Solicitor General's office is to conduct government litigations. This is when I was going to the Supreme Court, and the Solicitor General is the one that responds for the government in the Supreme Court in the US. So I wanted to make sure that I defeated their presumptions before we get to the Supreme Court. See what I'm saying? And so, anyways, they said that they review all cases decided adversely to the government in the lower courts to determine whether they should be appealed, and if so, what the government position should take. And in my letter, I asked them to acknowledge my requests, and then they said, due to our mission, they do not honor such requests. And so they're acknowledging it without acknowledging it. See what I'm saying? Anyways, but the interesting thing is that how they do the name, because they did it exactly like I told them, and they don't mention the family name because they know that at common law the family name's never mentioned. And I can't tell you how many times I've got stuff back like that, U.S. and Canada.
I'm noticing there's some on the right-hand side of the page too.
That's true. That's true.
What's that mean?
Kind of like the right side.
Debtor's sign on the left.
Yeah, right.
That one and the one from the city of Edmonton too.
Judges sign the same way.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Right-hand side, of course.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Well,
Right-hand side.
that's not exactly on the right.
That's the only place I ever
It's kind of in
sign.
the middle.
If you look at my criminal
It's more
complaints,
to the right than it is underneath the left.
if you look on any document that I put, I always sign on the right. This is, see, it's on the right. I always sign on the right. Right, that's close up. Negative responses. I get 99% of the time I don't get a response at all. I had a few good responses. I get a few bad ones. This is a bad one. Pennsylvania Attorney General sent a letter making all sorts of legal determinations. I sent him a letter. It's about an 8-page letter. Said basically that I'm going to be traveling in your area and I don't have a driver's license and you have no more authority over me than a Walmart rent-a-car. And they sent me a letter making all sorts of legal determinations and presumptions and said that they'd arrest my butt and take me down and put me in jail if I drove in Pennsylvania. And it had all of their little stamps on it. They sent me back my letter that I sent them. Great evidence. So it had little stamps and stuff on it showing they'd received it and all that. So it was great evidence. So I went and attached all of that stuff to a criminal complaint and sent it to the Chief Judge of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court and the U.S. Attorney. And a couple of weeks later, the U.S. Attorney sends me a letter back saying they'd referred to the matter to the FBI. And then on February 22nd, 2011, which was almost a year later, I checked the Pennsylvania Attorney General's website and it said, William H. Ryan Jr. becomes acting Pennsylvania Attorney General. I got his butt removed, the other one. His name was Corbin, actually. There's the website. So I got the other Pennsylvania, at least I think I did. Of course, they'll never admit it.
And you'll never know, ultimately.
No, no. But it's amazing how many times this kind of stuff happens. I can't tell you how many times it happens.
This is the people standing up, like what you're showing is just
Exactly.
examples. Because
Exactly.
there was
You build a
thousands
case
of people.
against them, and you invite the proper authorities, and they'll take care of it for you. That's what they should be doing.
Because ultimately, most of them are good people at heart.
That's right. That's right. Negative responses. Ohio Director of Public Safety, Henry Guzman, sent me a letter. On August 2009, I filed a criminal complaint sent to the Ohio Attorney General, the Chief Judge of the Supreme Court, and the State Bar and the U.S. Attorney. On the 22nd of February 2011, I checked their website, and it says that in January 2011, Thomas Charles was appointed Ohio Director of Public Safety, and Thomas P. Charles was formerly the Ohio Inspector General. Now, if anybody knows the law, the Inspector General does. Okay? He's basically the guy that's the cop in the government against all the bureaucrats. Okay? And there it is right here. I first started doing this when I was going through a foreclosure in Arizona. And I'll tell you all about that in a minute. I gotta hit the restroom.